Justice. I am Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist at Jamaicans For Justice.
Happy Tuesday to all listening in. I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ. And as customary, we just want to say thank you to those who continue to help build our Let's Start Justice program. I hope that it is as informative for you as we try to study and ensure that we know what we're talking about on air. Thanks again to you all. All right, so it's May month, May 30, and we continue to have conversation around child rights, issues of concern, how exactly as adults, as members of the state, government agencies, we're all ensuring that we're respecting the rights of the Jamaican child. My son is in studio with me today. So I hope as he listens in.
beaming into the control room. Desperate for Malik to think you're cool.
Oh, wow. But I hope that he's also learning and he's empowered about his rights. So I hope as a parent I'm doing him justice. Yes?
Okay.
All right. So the topic for today is examining the state of the juvenile remand system. And though we asked the question, is there room for reform? The answer is an obvious yes. And we're going to be joined by Carla Gulato, the Executive Director of Stand Up for Jamaica, Alexis Goff, Human Rights Advocate, very passionate about child rights issues, and also Mr. Hugh Faulkner, the Commissioner of Indicom.
Yes.
Right? So, last week, what happened in the news?
Wow, so many things happened in the news, but I feel as though it's been dominated by a certain salary conversation.
Oh.
Yes, but you know, other things came to light. We acknowledged the anniversary of the Armadale tragedy last week. 7
young girls who perished in a fire that could have been avoided. But because of the inhumane conditions that those young girls were being kept in at Armadale,
as well as improper protocols.
Improper protocol, and a canister was thrown in that room. The room was so small, but we're going to be getting a little bit more into that with Mr. Goff in particular.
Yes.
And what was sad, there was another fire in Guyana.
Yes.
That was caused by a teenager who unfortunately, well, that teenager is facing murder charges in Guyana now because unfortunately 19 other children lost their lives in that fire. And last week we also recognized that Tivoli incursion happened over 2 decades ago. And for those who saw wherein a commission of inquiry was demanded at the time, and despite advocacy from several members within JFJ and civil society, international organizations such as Amnesty, to date, the reforms that one would want to see within the Jamaica Constabulary Force have not been realized, and not one single officer has been held to account. And it certainly lends to this culture of impunity that we see, wherein our loved ones can be abused or killed by the state, and there's no real accountability taking shape. And on the matter of accountability, you mentioned the salary increases. So our political directorate, we would have seen over 200% salary increases for members of parliament. Some of the salaries, I think, at the cabinet level would have been tied to members of the judiciary and so on. And the public was outraged because JFJ, we have not spoken publicly on it, but I've said in my personal capacity that it was a little bit too much too soon at once without the accountability measures coming in. And we saw where the Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, made a symbolic gesture. That's the only thing I can call it respectfully, where he decided to forego his salary. But Mr. Prime Minister, we're saying that's empty symbolism. We need the government to ensure that there is independent review of the salaries at the political directorate, where there is some transparency with how you arrive at those figures. And rollback don't mean you don't take anything. It means that you take a little bit less to send a signal to those in the civil service that you stand in solidarity with the plight that they're facing. And again, accountability don't mean that you put up job descriptions. We call for it because it's important.
Yes.
It don't mean that at the executive it's just the prime minister overseeing his ministers. That's not real accountability. Accountability is also accountability by the people. And I think as we have the discussion around constitutional reform, what does that really mean?
Absolutely.
I need the right to recall. A voting, I should be able to vote out. I don't think I need to wait 5 years.
Absolutely. And I'm in complete agreement.
So we will continue the discussion around Armadale and so on in a few. But over to you, Jade.
Yeah. So we are going to go into our right segment. So our right of the day today comes from the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So you've learned quite a bit over this Child's Month from that convention. And I hope it's been useful to see where we have gaps in our local law. But yes, so Article 37C states that every child deprived of liberty shall be treated with humanity and respect for the inherent dignity of the human person, and in a manner which takes into account the needs of persons of his or her age. So we can have a discussion today to see if that's our local context right now. We also have a trivia question for this week before we go into our interviews. And that question is, name the 4 juvenile correctional facilities in Jamaica. So you can participate in our trivia by messaging us on our social media accounts or sending us a WhatsApp message at 239-7583. So the 4 juvenile correctional facilities.
All right, so the topic of today, examining the state of the juvenile remand system, and we're asking the question, is there need for reform? Now, we start out by indicating that in July to September 2020, there was an independent commission of investigation that detailed a report, or the report came from Indicom rather, around a special investigation into the Rio Cobre Juvenile Correctional Center. And for those who are listening in, I just gave you one of the 4, right? So pay attention. Now, some of the findings were quite alarming. We heard about things such as jail blocks, where our young boys were being disciplined. I don't know what discipline mean, but for those who are overseeing the Rio Cobre, discipline for them meant the young boys were stripped down in their underwear and they remain isolated in that jail block, where there are no bed sheets to cover the sponge mattress upon which they sleep. That was a report from Indicom.
Yes, and that report dated 2020 is reminiscent of some of the conditions that were present at the Armadale Juvenile Correctional Center prior to the tragedy that took place in May of 2009, May 22nd to be exact. And it was as a result of inappropriate punishment, over an overzealous response to unrest by the girls at the facility that led to the tear gas canister being thrown into that room, as you described earlier, Mikkel. And to date, coming out of that inquiry, there has been no real accountability for those girls.
And I know Mr. Goff will speak more about it. Several ATI requests made, and you remember when I talk about the black pages, when the state agencies redact those reports that they submit when you make a request. That was an example that Mr. Goff, I'm sure, will speak on. Now, what is also an area of concern for us is that between January to December 2021, the Department of Correctional Services said that of the 75 children who were on correctional order and enrolled in public school, almost 3/4, or 53 of them, were either expelled, suspended, or stopped going to school, as there is no established pathway for children under 18 to return to the public school system. There was also another report in 2022 from DCS that made mention that children were not receiving psychosocial support. No care whatsoever where that is concerned. The quality of the teachers that they had within the system was not up to the standards to ensure that our children were being adequately cared for. So we ask the question all the time about reoffending from our young people. And again, we will ask ourselves the question, what real reform or rehabilitation is taking place, especially when we're going to be delving a little bit deeper into the fact that all of these children that we have within the juvenile system are there for criminal offenses. These children are there because they are exhibiting maladaptive behaviors. What does that mean? A child who was molested, perhaps acting out.
Yes.
a brilliant child like my son, who my grandmother would say backchat you.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
But they are brilliant, they're intelligent, and they have an opinion that they should voice. But as Jamaicans, we say them backchat, and therefore they are uncontrollable.
Yes.
It's unfortunate, so we're going to be delving a little bit deeper into that. Do we have the guest on? Or we take an early break? All right, we'll take an early break and then we'll just go straight into the discussion.
All right.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We are discussing a topic that we're all passionate about, a topic that we're outraged about, a topic that we're asking Jamaican citizens to join us to call on the government to make amendments to the Child Care and Protection Act. Not the amendments that have since been tabled that will see our children being placed under mandatory minimum of 20 years if imprisoned for murder, but one that will see our children being protected and safeguarded from abuse, not only by parents, families, and communities, but also abuse that we have seen being meted out to them by the state itself. So we're looking at the state of the Juvenile Remand System, and we're joined by Alexis Goff, human rights advocate, and I think Alexis is perhaps more outraged than all of us, because he has been dealing with this particular matter of Armadale for years now. Alexis, welcome to the show.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining. If you could just paint a little background for the listeners, Alexis, in terms of what are some of the issues that you know our children face when they are imprisoned by the state. And then if you could just lead us into the background of the Armadale tragedy.
Okay, yes, so it's important for us to know that the legislation that we have and the policies that we have, the child quote-unquote protection system in Jamaica is still a colonial project. It's based in and embedded in the racist and colonial attitudes when Jamaica was a colony, and was formalized in the 19th century. And really, it's when we talk about the Child Care and Protection Act and the laws, folks might think that this applies to all children, but really it was meant to apply to specifically children from poor and working class African Jamaican families. The inception of our system really came from the colonial masters discussing. They had a commission of inquiry about the condition of juvenile population in Jamaica. This is shortly after the abolition of slavery in Jamaica. And the concern really was, there are all of these children of formerly enslaved Africans in Jamaica, all around Kingston, all on the streets. What we're going to do? And the comments in there and in the report from the ruling class, from the planter class, from the slave masters, was that, the conditions that the families are raising their children in is just deplorable, and really blaming families for that. Now, does that sound familiar to us, right?
Absolutely. Can you hear the conversation? What about the parents? Exactly.
Blaming parents, right? And so the response then was to start this law that was about the beyond control, beyond parental control. That's from the 19th century. So instead of focusing on the social and economic conditions that families and children found themselves in, caused by, right, and maintained by the colonial masters, they looked at criminalizing and institutionalizing and hiding children of families formerly enslaved, instead of providing them with a system and conditions where their basic needs are met. So that is centuries ago.
Yes.
We have held on to that law to today. Yes. And the uncontrollable law is the main law. It's the main reason why thousands of children have been either institutionalized or incarcerated. And so to your question about the reasons, as you stated earlier, uncontrollable can mean many things. A status offense, it only affects children. And it can mean that it's a child that is coming home later than the parents want or the families want. A child that might be missing some days of school. It might be a child that is, as you said, having a normal trauma response, from a response to a traumatic episode. right? And it can be families that are saying, I'm having a hard time with supporting my child or navigating this child's normal adolescent or childhood development and experience. So really it's the criminalization of childhood, of adolescent development, of of responses to traumatic experiences, of sexuality, because it can also be parents that are saying, like, my child, my son says that he love another boy, or might be in a relationship, and I don't approve, and I don't know what to do, not in my house.
So it's very broad, anything whatsoever.
That can be uncontrollable. Yeah. And so that is the main driving force for the main gateway for children in Jamaica. And I may just say again, for working class children,
yes,
to go into institutions or be incarcerated in prison.
Thanks, Alexis. Before we get into Armadale, we have Carlo Golato from Stand Up for Jamaica here with us. Thanks, Carlo.
Good afternoon. Thanks to you for having me today.
And I know Jade had a question posed to you regarding Section 24. Go ahead, Jade.
Yes. Well, I wondered, based on your experience looking into the lockups, Carla, if you have seen any level of rehabilitation of those children brought in under Section 24 under the basis that they're uncontrollable. Like, what's the average length of time that they're ordered to be in a remand center? Is there an average length? And then what are the steps to rehabilitation so that they are no longer uncontrollable, considering they haven't committed an offense?
And the infamous child care plan that they said that they do. Yes.
Yes.
Jade, thank you very much for this answer. As some of you know, we are working into the institution, and one of them is the female juvenile. So we have some daily experience. And I want to make some big difference between what is on paper and what is really happening, right? Mm-hmm. On paper, we can consider that there are programs for them, which are school, some professional lab, some psychological help, and some other activities. Mm-hmm. But the real problem is that all of them basically fail due to the age of the girls or the juveniles in general. Because incarceration for those at that age is interrupting dramatically their growing process. Mm-hmm. A juvenile is growing in a learning process, right? It's learning to do things, it's learning to deal with others, it's learning to go to the post office, it's learning to buy groceries, to go to a party, to take a bus, etc. All those children between the age of 14 and 18, they cannot do anything like that. Mm-hmm. They are locked in a place and they cannot experience the growing process in any way. So when we are looking at them, I think that this is, honestly, I think is the biggest failure that I have seen in all the correctional services system, but also in all the system in Jamaica, which should guarantee that children become healthy, mentally healthy adults. All of them, not even one, have traumas. All of them. Mm-hmm. They have traumas from two different perspectives, under two different perspectives. Where they coming from, because as Alexis was mentioning before, a lot of them are coming into the correctional system, which means, let me say, prison. It's a prison, mm-hmm. because something happened in their past, which has affected them. Most of them, I would say, good 90% have been abused, physically, mentally, etc., etc., and therefore they have bad reactions, and then they are incarcerated. So they should have been cured before, not even now entering in the prison. So they reach the prison with a big trauma, which the main avenue is the total lack of self-esteem. They believe that they are nobody, they are not capable to do anything, that they are not, they don't have a talent, they don't have a personality, they don't have a skill, nothing. Mm. They don't recognize any form, let me call it beauty, right? So they reach like this into a correctional institution this trauma is amplified to the 100% because the only feedback they have is you are being punished, you need to be punished, and you are not a good person. And also, let me say that professionally, most of the officers are not ready, are not capable to deal with these traumatized children. So, for example, the form of relationship is based on power. They order, they terrorize them. If they don't do anything, they're punished. There are cases which have been witnessing and try to do something where children have been put in isolation up to 30 days. Then they told me at the institution that when they came out, they were worse than before. I would suggest everybody to consider what it means for a 15 years old to be kept alone in a place on a mattress with just some food for 30 days. Nobody can be mentally sane after an experience like that.
Yes.
But
So
Carlo, you
we are
know,
looking at the system. I would say that this is the worst choice that a government, a state, civil society can do if we are talking about recuperating those children and try to give them some form of future.
one of the recommendations, Carlo, is for more social workers, separate and apart from more adolescent psychologists. And I think it was last week the government announced that they're assigning one social worker per member of parliament to do work.
Did they indicate the requirements for the, as in the qualifications? For
No,
that
they
position?
didn't.
Oh, okay.
Some of our parliamentarians.
So I'm not sure if you had any feedback in terms of whether or not that is the best use of resources, Carlo. I have a burning question for Alexis as well, but Carlo, please go ahead. I'm not sure if you saw that announcement from the government.
I was going to say that maybe some parliamentarians need some counseling urgently.
Oh,
I agree with that. I don't think that this is obviously the solution. I think
Okay.
that also what we witness is the total lack of resources. There is one psychiatrist which is working for the full population of correctional services, which is an average of 4,000 people.
and that's
We
both children
think
and
that
adults
will
you're
allow
talking?
juveniles to receive appropriate mental assistance, mental care, counseling, impossible.
Thanks, Carla. Alexis, one of the questions somebody posed to me on Twitter, and it was a private message. I think they genuinely did not understand. There was an article that came out a few days ago where two young boys escaped from Rio Cobre. I think they were on gun charges.
Yes.
And the question the person asked me on Twitter, how can you keep defending these young boys? Because they need something. I'm not saying they should be jailed for all their life, but they need something. What would be your reaction to someone like that, Alexis, on social media? Because I think that is the kind of response that we get from the general public. That we're all bleeding hearts. We only share the stories and the case studies that Carla highlighted earlier. And that we're not in tune with the realities on the ground. I'm not sure if you have any feedback for that listener who said that he would have tuned into today's program, actually.
Yeah, well, there are a number of responses. I mean, that reaction makes sense, right? Actually, it makes sense why people feel that way. One is that children and adolescents have the greatest possibility of change behavior, right? And that when they do make whatever mistakes they make, that the response cannot be that we are harder on them, that we increase the likelihood of them being further traumatized, further victimized, further, abused, but that we actually support them, that we gather around them and we support them and give the support that they need. Because we should believe that children are not fully developed yet, their brains are still developing, that they definitely have, as I said, the greatest possibility of change, right?
Yes.
And unlearning behaviors.
Yes.
The second I would say is never automatically believe the state's version of what a child is in prison for. Never believe that. It is always good to be skeptical. Even a child on gun charges, There are reasons that there are legitimate reasons why we should be skeptical of that. A child that is in a car of where there are adults that have gone out to do some crime with guns can be charged for gun charges, right? One. Two, a child that holds a gun could be doing that for self-defense. Children are able to and have that agency and right to defend themselves, and are in, as Carla and both of you have said, are in really problematic, challenging, harmful situations, right? So I say to people that it's best to question always, and don't just, you see the charge there, don't just then label them as, or dismiss them, or think of them as disposable, as criminal, for the rest of their life, they're going to be horrible, but that there needs to be the capacity to show them, and the belief that they can change, and that is not always, let me say this, it is not, we know the word and the term personal responsibility wholly now from the pandemic, that is not a business of personal responsibility. Personal responsibility excuses the government, excuses the state from their responsibilities, and that to actually try and support a child to go down a different path needs support at a community level, needs state and systemic support, of which we currently do not have.
Right, thanks. We have to take the break, Alexis, but please stay with us, Alexis and Carlo. And we have Mr. Hugh Faulkner joining us in studio.
Yes. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are joined by several guests, Mr. Alexis Goff, Ms. Carla Galota, and Mr. Hugh Faulkner. We're talking about examining our juvenile correctional system, and feel free to call in with your thoughts and comments at 676-4996, or you can send us a WhatsApp message at 239-7583. Now,
Mr. Faulkner, thank you so much for joining us. What is INDECOM's position on the Section 24, uncontrollable children?
Right, so in our third quarterly report of 2021, we had indicated that that section of the Child Protection Act must be repealed, because what it does, it put a child in the position where a magistrate at the parish court can make a correctional order. In other words, send you to Pitney prison without you being convicted of a criminal offense. So the uncontrollable behavior, which from the reading of the act means that the guardian or parents find you uncontrollable. So you might find that the standards of what a grandmother considers uncontrollable different from what a mother considers uncontrollable, depending on the era of growing up. So we believe that a behavioral challenge should not land you in a correctional facility. So it ought to be some institution that can modify behavior, but not in a Pitney prison, so to speak.
Thanks so much. And, one of the concerns I have is that I've listened to public officials, and I'm not sure if it's going to be fully repealed, or whether it's what they call it, modernizing the language.
Yes.
That's what I recall Minister Williams saying, which is, I think we have to watch that carefully. But from INDECOM's standpoint, I know several reports would have been done over the years.
Yes.
What are some of the findings and the recommendations that you would have? Because we've heard the gaps from Alexis, we've heard the gaps from Carlo. What would be your recommendation for change? How do we reform the juvenile system?
Right. I believe if we stick to the proper protocol, the protocol that has been approved by international bodies to which we are signatories, then compliance, yes, there'll be some financial outlay, but I think our children deserve it. And I would treat remand a little different. So in other words, the adult who is sent to, for example, a correctional facility on Tower Street,
yes,
that person would have been would have gone through the judicial process and becomes an inmate serving time for an offense. The juveniles on remand are those who are going through the justice system, not necessarily convicted. So they would be, some would be at Barrett Town, some would be at the Metcalf Street,
I hope you can't remember anymore because we have a trivia question for the
Okay,
listeners.
all right.
So basically, if they were listening,
Yes, exactly.
we gave them 2 and
All
we gave
right,
them 1
okay.
earlier, so they only have the
Right.
task of.
So I'm focusing on remand.
Yes.
So a child is held for a criminal offense. Say you thief a phone and you're in custody, you don't get bail yet. So you're on remand. We are saying the remand facilities must have a bed, must have recreational facilities. The remand.
Sorry, Mr. Fortner. You say must have a bed because the listeners, people are listening in, and you say a bed, something as basic as that. That's what we're saying.
I'm saying that these things must be present, right? Because they're minors, then there ought to be structured opportunity for tuition. Remember, if you are out of school, then you would be stagnating intellectually
Yes.
and maybe doing irreparable harm. There must be proper sanitation. There must be proper ventilation so that they get adequate air. There must be proper lighting. And in terms of even the schedule should be like a boarding school. In other words, you have wake-up time, you have shower time, you have breakfast time, you have your school.
I went to Westwood High School. We had
etc.
prep time. This is
Right,
and girl
right.
as well beside me.
Yes, indeed.
So no, that's
Right.
interesting. Yes, that's structured
Right.
to ensure that
Yes,
recreation,
and I believe-
the leisure, the play, and the study all maintained and balanced.
Indeed. So I believe that effort, that concerted effort should be made to improve the remand situation. Because yes, at remand, you might have the youngster who was held with a firearm. But in that same remand facility, you might have I'd seen one where his stepfather had reported that he stole his money and he was in remand. So I'm saying that expose the children to the adequate and proper facilities, and that maybe could speak even louder than words of rehabilitation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jade.
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Fortner, moving away from you.
No problem.
I actually had a follow-up that I wanted to ask Alexis. So in terms of the work that you did around Armadale and the recommendations that were made in that time, have you seen any implementation of those recommendations? Has there been any improvement from those specific recommendations that you've observed?
No, there is not, and I think we're illustrating that in all of our comments here today. That there hasn't been. There was, strong recommendations from the Commission of Inquiry report, because it was, reported and shown that the education system was virtually non-existent at Armadale. That children were not exposed to the same curriculum if you were going to a government school and if you were going into if you were in a prison. It was also exposed that solitary confinement, that collective punishment were practices that should end. And as Carla has reported, the DCS is still using solitary confinement as punishment. They love to say that they're not, because the child is not actually alone, but is solitary confinement, and the psychological and emotional impact of that amounts to torture. As a matter of fact, psychologists, there is consensus that anything over, I think it's 10 or 14 days in solitary confinement is tantamount to torture. And so that has not changed. And so the major recommendations that were in place for Armadale have not changed at all. The majority of children that were at Armadale were therefore either being in need of care and protection or uncontrollable. And as we have also said, already, the majority of children that have been fed into prisons have been for uncontrollable years later. So we have not seen serious implementation of on top of the recommendation, and it is because the system is doing exactly what it was meant to do. It's not being seen as broken. It's not being seen in need of fixing, but it is quite efficient at doing what it set out to do, which was, to hide and to punish Black working class children.
Carla, from your end, we've been talking about this. Armadale happened, 2009?
Yes.
We've had the Walker's Place of Safety.
Yes.
State institution, Bridging Light. I never hear of such a thing that could have caused a fire. We made mention of the rear Cobre jail block earlier. Where is Stand Up for Jamaica, Carla, in terms of... I know you may be personally fed up at some point, because I share it with you. But where is that call? If you could just explain to the listeners, what is your recommendation at this stage? And before you answer, I note that there is a new state minister assigned to the Ministry of Education, Member of Parliament Marsha Smith. And she has responsibility from media announcements now that she's going to be guiding the child protection sector.
Yes.
That's what we gleaned from an Observer report. So, Carla, any expectation from Ms. Smith in her new role? Anything from the government as they review the Child Care Protection Act?
I cannot read the future, right? But what I can see is the present. According to what I actually have been experiencing with the Stand Up along all these years, I didn't see many implementations. But I want to do something a little different. Allow me, please. I want to discuss with those which are listening to this program to what does it mean to be a child alone. Because all those people which are in conflict with the law, we work also with youth at risk outside the prison. When we, it's a horrible way to assess them. So when we talk to them at the beginning, what is the mainstream that we discover is the perfect loneliness, right? The fathers are not there, sometimes they don't even know who they are. The mothers, I don't want to put the blame on the mothers, but they are hustling to try to put some bread on the table. Those children, they grow without any form of guidance. So my question to those which are advocating for tough punishments are, did anybody take care of those children before they have done something wrong? Did those children have the right to be children instead of being a poor little things left behind? I think that if a nation is started to investigate about how to implement X, Y, Z, the first thing which needs to be done is to go to the roots of the problem. And the roots of the problem is that there are an amount of failures, and Stand Up has been signaling them over and over. For example, the school system. The school system should provide not only English, but there must be a counselor there, there must be a PTA, there must be an amount of teachers which one of them signal which children show sign of trauma. No. It's happening very, very seldom. So if we ignore, let me call it the cry of a child, you want to condemn those which are shouting loud because they cannot manage it. I would really think twice. If there is a form of punishment, the punishment need only to be helping the child build his personality, his life, his future. Punishment sometimes might be useful, but it depends what is the concept behind it. If you just want to punish them, as we mentioned before, and put them in segregation for 30 days, you have committed a crime. A crime in terms of legal crime, but also a crime against humanity, because you have been failed. You are being failed in educating, in taking care of, and remember that children are still extremely vulnerable. We can be fed up, we can be discouraged, we can be skeptic.
5 more seconds, Carla, because we're going to have to leave it there. The producers are waving their hands at us. Alexis, 10 seconds, last word from you.
last word would be we need to go to the root causes. That stopping uncontrollable is a start. It is a pathway to what we need to do, but we cannot end there. We need to go beyond to ensure that far fewer children are exposed and in these.
Thank you, and thank you both for joining us.
We're going to take the break because we're actually 3 minutes behind, and then when we return, we have conversations with Mr. Faulkner from Indicom dealing with matters of trafficking and the implications for our youngsters. We take the break. Thanks. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We're talking about children's rights, and it's a topic that is important, especially as the government goes down this path of mandatory minimums, because we're going to be make a bad situation far, far worse.
Yes. I was actually interviewed about it this morning.
Yeah.
But I had to reiterate because the question was asked whether, considering the situation in Guyana, for example, if something like that were to happen, wouldn't we want to see
that child facing a life sentence?
A 20-year sentence.
Possible life.
Well, true.
Because remember, the 20 is, the minimum.
The minimum, yes. I had to reiterate that I cannot speak about a hypothetical case, but what I can say is that I am for, firstly, the rehabilitation of our children. And
I would say, quite frankly, it doesn't. I think sometimes the public have this perception, Mr. Faulkner, that when an organization has a principled position, they come with all sort of case scenarios to say, but if this happened, what would you say? And our position remains. Allow the judge, the court system, to look on the unique circumstances of the case and meet. Do you have an opinion from Indicom on mandatory minimums that you can share publicly?
Well, usually when it comes to matters of that nature that within the purview of the legislature, we tend hardly
to speak.
Right. Save and accept what touches our act or some other act which impinges on what we do.
Mm-hmm. So you see at JFJ, when we say we have to speak on matters within our mandates, a similar conversation.
Indeed.
One of the things we wanted to touch on quickly, we have about 5 minutes of discussion to have. Human trafficking.
Yes.
It's a serious matter in the country, one I think we don't pay much attention to, especially when it involves our children. For example, we see a young girl new in our community. It may be with an older gentleman and an adult, and we say one little bad pitney that, and we start labeling. What are some of those things that as Jamaican citizens we should be looking out for? Can you speak generally on Indicom's work in this regard?
Right. Well, I would term human trafficking one of the emerging offenses. A decade or two ago, you hardly had any active anti-gang legislation.
Yes.
Certain things like grooming of a child was not an offense prior to 2010. In the new slate of legislation now, you have the Trafficking in Persons Act.
Yes.
Trafficking in persons tend to be even cross-border. So the world itself looks at a country like Jamaica and assesses what steps have you been taking to protect children and to punish perpetrators in terms of offenses against children. What we can say and what we're all agreed in, trafficking in persons is an exploitative offense of children. It opens children to exploitation in terms of almost slave-like conditions where they're not going to school, they're working, they're becoming helpers, they're becoming babysitters, they are being exploited sexually, etc. So the act seeks to stem that scourge. In Indicom, we have trained in the region of at least 30 investigators. So in the execution of our duties in investigating matters with the law enforcement bodies, our investigators, if they identify scenarios, because from time to time you go to premises to interview witnesses, you go at scenes, sometimes the incident scene is a home, etc. And you can pick up situations. So we have added child trafficking to our category of offences. And when you look at the international experience, there are sometimes entities, businesses, what appear to be legitimate businesses, for example, massage parlors, etc.,
Yes.
or clubs. And you may find that among the staff are children. And sometimes, because we have the mandate over law enforcement bodies, sometimes these businesses, they overseas, from the overseas experiences, you have officers moonlighting who provide security.
Yes.
So it is something, just looking at the overseas examples, that we have taken a note of, and our staff are trained in terms of detecting it. Not only that, we have established a child-friendly interview suite.
And I've had the privilege of seeing that.
Oh,
that
right.
space, yes.
So a child who has been traumatized, sexually abused, or exploited in a labor sense, sometimes it's difficult for them to restate.
So as a citizen, Mr. Faulkner, what do I look out for? What are some of those signs? I know it's
Mikhail,
not easy to detect,
it's
but
not easy to detect.
but what
Why?
make the hair upon the back of your neck stand up and say
Why?
something not right?
Because child trafficking, at times, it masks itself as help.
Yes.
So somebody identifies a child in poverty, tell the mother possibly that we can make this child have a better life and take them out of poverty. And they go to a situation where they are working from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., no school, exploited, can't leave. In terms of adults, sometimes their travel documents are
So
confiscated.
I can say, okay, why is that child at this house for the whole day?
Yes.
And ask those questions
you-
and call 211.
Exactly. And you're not seeing the child coming out in uniform going to school.
Yes.
You may see bruises, you may see other signs of molestation, sometimes withdrawn. So we are our brothers and sisters keepers, so we can, be an observing eye.
Yes. Is there any number to call in the com, or do we just call 211?
Right. Well, in the that number I do not have with me at the moment.
That's fine.
But-
So
but
listeners, Google in the com and call.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. Especially where it affects where the allegations touch on concern law enforcement bodies. That would be our mandate. But otherwise, we would put the matter. The children's advocate is the national rapporteur
Yes.
for under the trafficking in persons, and there's a secretariat at the Ministry of National Security. So there are ample opportunities for avenues for persons to make the reports.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
Great work. Thank you so much. And kudos to Indicom, Office of the Children's Advocate. The 211 number is quite easy to remember.
Yes.
So all the things that we discussed earlier, as well as other matters that you may observe that may impact our youngsters, report it. Don't look at it and say, okay, that person, man or woman, may be somebody in the community that have local reputation, therefore I won't. It's better to say, I'm sorry, the police will know how to protect that reputation.
Yes.
Report what don't feel right. Protect our children. All right?
Absolutely.
Over to you, Jay.
Well, unfortunately, we don't seem to have a winner.
Really? And three of the
trivia.
four?
It may be partially my fault because I didn't post it on Instagram, but we didn't get a DM. We didn't get a DM in relation to it, and we did not get a WhatsApp message.
So we will still post it on Instagram.
Yeah, so we'll
and
post
ask
it on
persons.
Instagram, and we'll give it up to an hour after the show for our winner to give us the correct answer.
I'm sure Carol, what's her name? Carol will respond.
Yes. We have some
Brilliant, Carol.
Kamala as well.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
But that's it for today. As we close out Child's Month, just remember all of what we discussed and be good parents, be good uncles and aunts and cousins, family members, communities, and let's see if Jamaica can get to the country, the Vision 2030 dream that we all have.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week at the same time.
And before we close out, thank you to our guest, and Mr. Faulkner is in
Yes,
studio
my
with us.
pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a good Tuesday.